It's disgusting how nasty, bitter, jealous, envious some of these players are that used to play in the WNBA back when nobody watched. Back when nobody had a thought, oh, I wonder who's playing tonight. Back when you would leave the library because it was getting too rowdy, so you would go to a WNBA game to get your work done because you knew it would be far more quiet. That group, that era of women's basketball player, they're extremely jealous towards this current generation. We all know Cheryl Swoops. Cheryl Swoops making up lies, throwing shots. But you know who's been giving Cheryl Swoops a run for her money? You know who's been giving Cheryl Swoops a run for her money as the most bitter, jealous, nastiest, old guard WNBA player to walk the face of the earth? Angel McCoughtry. Angel McCoughtry has her own podcast. She has her own platform. So she could talk about whatever it is she wants to talk about. Yet she always decides to talk about the newer generation of player and how they're getting more shine and more money than she ever could have imagined. She brought up Hailey Van Lith a year ago. Oh, Hailey Van Lith, she's only drafted because of her clout. Okay. You bring up Angel Reese a year ago. You brought up Angel Reese during her rookie season. Oh, Angel Reese, Angel Reese. If I was getting paid all this money, I'm paying my teammates too. Huh? Wait, what? And now here you are talking about Caitlin Clark, saying Caitlin Clark is dominating the WNBA conversation.
You are watching a grown woman, a former professional basketball player, somebody who had every opportunity in the world to become a household name, sit behind a microphone and tell the world that Caitlin Clark getting attention is somehow a problem. Let that marinate for a second. Let that sink all the way down. I'm Dre Fiver, this is Street Hoops. And today, we are not playing nice. Today we are going full tabloid, full throttle, no breaks. Because what Angel McCoughtry just said on her podcast is one of the most delusional, most transparently jealous, most painfully self-unaware things I have heard from an ex-WNBA player since Cheryl Swoops decided to make up a fictional universe where Caitlin Clark isn't actually that good. Smash the like button right now. Subscribe to the channel. Drop your hottest take in the comments. Let's get into this. So here's the scene. It is late May 2025. Caitlin Clark is the Grand Marshal of the Indianapolis 500. She is pulling up to one of the most iconic motorsport events in the history of American athletics, draped in star power, commanding cameras, commanding headlines, commanding the kind of presence that most athletes spend their entire careers chasing and never find. And while all of that is happening, while CC22 is literally standing at the intersection of sports culture and mainstream celebrity, Angel McCoughtry is on her podcast talking about how we recycle the same players in WNBA media coverage. The timing alone should tell you everything you need to know about where Angel McCoughtry's head is at right now. Let me be crystal clear about something before we go any further, because I want this on the record. Angel McCoughtry had a legitimate basketball career. She was a 5-time WNBA All-Star. She was a 2-time Olympic gold medalist. She could score. She could get buckets. Nobody here is taking that away from her. But here is the thing about legacy in professional sports, and I say this with the full force of someone who has watched this sport evolve in real time. Your legacy is not determined by what you did. Your legacy is ultimately shaped by what you do after you hang up the sneakers. And right now, Angel McCoughtry is actively choosing to spend her post-playing platform throwing cold water on the players who are doing what she never could, filling arenas, pulling cable ratings, and making casual sports fans say, wait, when does the Fever play again? Now let's talk about the numbers. Because numbers don't have feelings, and numbers don't have an agenda. The very first WNBA game to air on USA Network in 2025, the Las Vegas Aces against the Los Angeles Sparks, a game featuring A'ja Wilson, who is by every reasonable basketball metric an all-time great, pulled 529,000 viewers. USA Network's PR team was practically doing backflips over that number. They were treating it like a Super Bowl. And look, for context, that's not a bad number for women's basketball historically. But here's where it gets interesting. Here's where the story starts writing itself. The Indiana Fever played Portland. Caitlin Clark was not in the lineup. The injury report dropped late. So fans tuned in, realized she wasn't playing, and many of them still stayed. And that game drew 680,000 viewers. a Caitlin Clarkless Indiana Fever basketball team on a random weeknight drew 150,000 more eyeballs than Asia Wilson's Las Vegas Aces on a weekend on their debut broadcast. I'm not editorializing that. That is just what happened. And if the numbers are out there, I'm going to tell you about them every single time. So when Angel McCaffrey gets on her podcast and says the league is about more than just one or two players, I want to ask her a very direct question. Then why aren't the other games pulling those numbers? If the league is this vast, this rich, this deep with talent and story and drama beyond Caitlin Clark, and I do believe there is real talent in this league, I want to be fair, then why does the needle move the way it moves specifically when the Indiana Fever are involved? Why does every network that lands a Fever game treat it like a premium property? Why do sponsors circle those dates on the calendar like they're circling playoff games? The market is not lying. The market is incapable of lying. 529 versus 680. The market has spoken. Angel McCaffrey just doesn't want to hear what it's saying. And I'll tell you something else. Something that really gets under my skin about the way this conversation keeps going. Angel McCaffrey has her own platform. She has built a media presence where she can discuss literally anything she wants. She could talk about the evolution of the postgame in women's basketball. She could do deep dives on international players who are changing the sport. She could build content around the business side of the WNBA, the expansion, the new franchises. She could make Kelsey Mitchell the centerpiece of 20 episodes if she wanted to. Nobody is stopping her. But instead, every few weeks, Angel McCaffrey finds her way back to Caitlin Clark, like a boomerang, like a moth to a flame, like she physically cannot help herself. She talked about Hailey Van Lith. She came at Angel Reese during Angel Reese's rookie season with that bizarre comment about paying teammates. And now she's back on Caitlin Clark, saying the conversation is too concentrated. Angel, with respect, and I'm using that word loosely right now, you are the one concentrating the conversation. You are the one who keeps bringing her up. You are doing exactly what you claim to be frustrated by, except you're doing it from a place of bitterness instead of a place of celebration. Let me draw a comparison here that I think puts all of this into perspective. What does the NBA do? What has sports media always done? They recycle the same stars. Steph Curry, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, Nikola Jokic, Anthony Edwards, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. You turn on any NBA broadcast, any sports talk show, any podcast in the basketball universe, and those are the names you are hearing on rotation. Always. Every single day of the season. And nobody, not one former NBA player with a podcast, nobody is sitting behind a microphone saying, you know what? I think we talk about Steph Curry too much. What about the other 14 guys on the Warriors roster? What about the bench players? Don't they deserve shine? Because that would be ridiculous. That would be an embarrassing thing to say publicly. Stars drive narratives. Stars drive ratings. Stars drive revenue. That is how professional sports have always worked. In every league, in every era, on every continent. Angel McCaffrey knows this. She played at the highest level. She understands how the machinery of professional sports operates, which means her argument isn't actually about media fairness. It's about something else entirely. And I'll tell you exactly what it's about. It is about the fact that Angel McCaffrey played in an era of the WNBA when the league was, to be brutally honest, largely invisible to the mainstream sports conversation. She played during a time when getting a game on television was an achievement in itself. She played during a time when a WNBA player being the Grand Marshal of the Indianapolis 500 would have been pure fantasy, and she gave years of her life to this sport, put her body on the line, competed at an elite level, and the culture largely did not notice. That is genuinely unfortunate. That is a real thing to grieve if you're Angel McCaffrey. I actually have some empathy for that part of the story. But here is where the empathy ends. The answer to that grief is not to resent the player who finally broke through the ceiling. The answer is not to minimize what Caitlin Clark has done for this league, for ratings, for sponsorships, for the visibility of women's basketball on a global stage. The answer is to recognize that a rising tide lifts all boats, and get on the boat. Because here is the thing that people like Angel McCaffrey refuse to acknowledge when they have these conversations. Every WNBA player, active or retired, benefits from the Caitlin Clark effect. Every single one. When Clark pulls 680,000 viewers to a game she isn't even playing in, that means new fans are forming habits around women's basketball. That means casual viewers are learning team names, learning rosters, learning storylines beyond CC22. That means a fan who showed up for Clark in 2024 is maybe a Kelsey Mitchell fan by 2026. That means the league's overall media value goes up, which means the next broadcast deal is richer, which means player salaries go up, which means the sport that Angel McCoughtry dedicated her career to becomes more financially sustainable and more culturally relevant than it has ever been. Angel McCoughtry should be on her podcast every single week saying thank you, not throwing shade from the cheap seats. Now I want to get into something that I think is the most intellectually dishonest part of Angel McCoughtry's argument, and it is the part that I actually find most offensive as someone who analyzes sports media for a living. She made the point, and I'm paraphrasing here, that when Caitlin Clark got hurt, nobody wanted to come to the game anymore, and she framed that as a negative. She said it like it was some kind of indictment of Caitlin Clark's influence, or some kind of evidence that the league shouldn't be so Clark-dependent. But Angel, that is literally how star power works in every professional sport ever. If LeBron James goes down with a hamstring injury the night before a Laker game, ticket prices drop, television viewership drops, the pregame buzz drops. That is not a criticism of LeBron. That is the definition of being irreplaceable. That is the definition of being a star. When your absence is felt that acutely, that is not a weakness. That is the ultimate validation of your importance. The fact that casual fans who hadn't yet fully committed to the WNBA product dialed back their engagement when Clark was unavailable is not a red flag. It is data. It is the market telling you, in real time, who the most valuable draw in women's professional basketball is. And the answer, the undeniable ratings-backed, sponsor-confirmed, ticket sales-validated answer, is Caitlin Clark. I want to bring in something that a content creator I respect made me think about recently, and I want to credit the thought without putting words in anyone's mouth. The observation was around Tiffany Hayes and this idea of trash talk and getting in Caitlin Clark's face. And the question was posed, if a player in the WNBA posterized someone, wouldn't they talk their trash? Of course they would. And here is why that analogy is so perfectly constructed. Caitlin Clark hitting a logo 3 from 40-plus feet is the functional equivalent of a poster dunk in the WNBA, because nobody else in that league can do it. Nobody else in that league can rise up from that range with that consistency and splash it with that kind of cold-blooded confidence. You watch Clark pull up from the logo, and it has the same effect on a crowd that a baseline reverse jam has in the NBA. It is a moment of athletic exceptionalism that the sport of basketball, at any level, at any tier, has always celebrated and will always celebrate. The difference between a poster dunk and a Clark Logo 3 is just physics, because in the WNBA, nobody can sky and throw it down on someone's head. But only one person in that league can disrespect your entire defense from 40 feet with a flick of the wrist, and that singularity, that thing that only she can do, is precisely why we keep coming back to her. It is not media bias. It is not a conspiracy. It is the oldest story in sports. Exceptional talent demands exceptional attention. And while we're on the subject of exceptionalism, let's talk about the media ecosystem that Angel McCoughtry is actually criticizing, because I think she's conflating two very different things and using that conflation to obscure what is genuinely a pretty thin argument. She is complaining about media coverage concentration, the same 10 players, she says. But what she is actually describing is the natural behavior of sports media in a market where attention is finite and competition for eyeballs is infinite. Sports media has always operated on the star economy model. You give the most airtime to the players who generate the most engagement, the most debate, the most emotional investment from the audience. This is not a WNBA-specific phenomenon. This is just how media works. The complaint that Caitlin Clark gets too much coverage is structurally identical to someone complaining in 2016 that ESPN talked about Steph Curry too much during the Warriors' 73-win season. You know what the answer to that was? Stop having a historic season, Steph. And until someone in the WNBA starts doing the things that Clark does, the record-breaking assist numbers, the historic shooting performances, the crossover celebrity that extends well beyond the basketball court, the coverage is going to follow her, because that is what audiences want. And audiences, not former players with podcasts, decide what gets covered. What makes Angel McCoughtry's position even more difficult to defend is the fact that the voices who are pushing back on her narrative are not fringe commentators. Sports business reporters have been tracking WNBA viewership metrics all season, and the pattern is undeniable. Networks that carry Indiana Fever games are reporting numbers that would have been unimaginable 3 years ago. Sponsorship deals tied to Clark's presence in the league have reportedly changed the financial calculus for franchises beyond Indiana. The expansion wave that the WNBA is currently riding, new franchises, new markets, record-breaking investment, is happening in a landscape that Caitlin Clark helped create. None of that is speculation. That is industry reporting from people who cover sports business professionally and have no dog in the drama fight that Angel McCoughtry seems to be picking every other week. I also want to address the comparison that someone made in the original conversation that I think gets glossed over way too quickly. There was a point made about the media personality who built her career interviewing Steph Curry during the Golden State Warriors dynasty. And the question was asked, why was she always interviewing Steph? Why wasn't she sideline interviewing Andrew Bogut between quarters? Why wasn't it always a Sean Livingston interview in the fourth? And we all know why. Because Steph Curry was must-see television. Because Steph Curry's presence on that sideline, or in that locker room, or in front of that microphone, was appointment viewing in a way that simply did not apply to the other players on that roster, as talented and as important as some of them were to that championship run. The media gravitates to stars. That is not an injustice. That is not a conspiracy against the supporting cast. That is just the fundamental nature of how popular entertainment, and sports is popular entertainment, functions at scale. Angel McCoughtry knows this. She just doesn't like the implication. And here is the implication, laid out plainly, with no sugarcoating, because this is Street Hoops, and we do not sugarcoat. The implication is that if Angel McCoughtry had done what Caitlin Clark is doing, Angel McCoughtry would be getting the same coverage. The implication is that the media does not have a women's basketball problem. The media has always been willing to follow exceptionalism wherever it lives. The implication is that the relative invisibility of the WNBA during Angel McCoughtry's playing era was not primarily a media failure or a cultural conspiracy. It was, in significant part, a product engagement problem. The product, at that time, was not generating the kind of broad popular demand that commands mainstream media real estate. That is a painful truth. It is a truth that implicates the league, the teams, the marketing, the broadcast deals, and yes, the level of star power that was available to attract casual viewers. Caitlin Clark walked in and changed the equation. And the response from certain corners of the WNBA old guard has been, at best, ungracious, and at worst, actively corrosive to the momentum that she helped build. Now, I want to be fair to one part of what Angel McCoughtry is saying, because intellectual honesty demands it. She is correct that the WNBA has a deep roster of talented, compelling players beyond Caitlin Clark. Kelsey Mitchell is a legitimate star. Aja Wilson is one of the greatest players the league has ever produced. Breanna Stewart's story is remarkable. There are international players in this league who are doing things on the court that deserve more mainstream attention than they get. That is all true. And if McCoughtry's podcast was consistently doing the work of amplifying those players, building narratives around them, telling their stories, creating the kind of content that brings new fans into their orbits, then her critique of concentrated media coverage would have credibility. But when your own content keeps circling back to Caitlin Clark, you don't actually get to make the argument that the media's Caitlin Clark obsession is the problem. You are the media. Your podcast is media. Your platform is part of the machine you claim to be criticizing. And every time you put Caitlin Clark in a title, or in a headline, or in the first 5 minutes of your episode, you are feeding the exact dynamic you say you resent. That is not hypocrisy from a distance. That is hypocrisy in real time, in your own audio files, with your own microphone. And I think on some level, Angel McCoughtry knows this. I think on some level, there is an awareness that the engagement goes up when Clark's name is in the feed. Because that is what happens. That is the Caitlin Clark effect touching everybody in the WNBA media ecosystem, including the people who spend their platform complaining about the Caitlin Clark effect. You cannot escape the gravity of a star. You can only choose how you respond to it. The broader issue, and this is where I want to land the plane before we wrap this thing up, the broader issue is that the WNBA is at a genuine inflection point. This league is growing. The business numbers are moving in a direction that nobody would have predicted half a decade ago. New franchises are coming, broadcast deals are getting richer, sponsors are competing for WNBA real estate in a way that simply did not exist before. And right at this moment, right at this inflection point, the most visible critical voices coming from within the WNBA community are not celebrating the growth. They are relitigating grievances. They are pointing at Caitlin Clark and saying, too much attention, too much coverage, too much shine, as if the goal was ever to limit success rather than to expand it. And I have to ask, genuinely, not rhetorically, who does that serve? Not the current players, whose visibility and earning potential are tied to the league's overall growth. Not the fans, who want to be celebrated for showing up rather than lectured about which players deserve their attention. Not the league, which needs cultural momentum, not internal drama, to sustain the trajectory it is on. The only person it serves is the one doing the complaining who gets podcast engagement and social media clips and a little bit of controversy-driven attention for saying the contrarian thing, which, ironically, is exactly the playbook that Angel McCoughtry is accusing everyone else of running. This is Street Hoops. We call it straight, we call it loud. And right now, the call is this. Caitlin Clark is the most important player in the history of the WNBA in terms of cultural impact. That is not a slight to the legends who came before her. That is a fact supported by viewership numbers, sponsorship dollars, arena attendance figures, and the trajectory of the league's business at every level. Angel McCoughtry had a great career, but this is not her moment. This is not her league anymore. And the sooner she, and Cheryl Swoops, and whoever else wants to join this parade of resentment, the sooner they make peace with that reality, the sooner they can actually use their platforms to do something constructive for the sport they claim to love. Caitlin Clark is going to keep hitting logo threes. The Fever are going to keep pulling numbers. The league is going to keep growing. And Dre Fiver is going to keep telling you exactly what it is, with zero filter every single time. That is a promise. All right, Street Hoops family, if you made it this far, you already know what time it is. Smash that like button right now. Let the algorithm know we out here. Drop your take in the comments. I want to know, is Angel McCoughtry out of line, or is she speaking facts? Let me know where you stand. And if you are not subscribed to Street Hoops yet, what are you even doing? Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, because we are dropping heat every single week, and you do not want to be the last one to know. This is Dre Fiver. Street Hoops, we out.